Book friends, welcome to the 3 billionth book games. May the odds be ever in your favor. It's not the 3 billion, but one day. Today, if you guessed it, we will be talking about the Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the prequel that recently, a couple years ago, came out to the Hunger Games franchise. The movie just came out that is the adaptation of that book. Is this one? The Ballads of the Songbirds and Snakes. It's by Suzanne Collins. I have the paperback version, so nothing too fantabulous here. Very good paper though, I will say that, and it's pretty good quality paperback, I will say, for what you get. It is, like I said, the prequel to the Hunger Games series. I have this little box set here. All 3 of the books. You've got, upside down, you've got the Hunger Games. Again, pretty good paper, good quality. Scholastic usually does really well with quality of the books themselves. Fire. It's red. She likes the colors. So you got black, red, blue, and again, same quality. They're pretty thick pages. And you have green for the prequel. Now the prequel is actually the longest out of all of these, coming in at something like 500 pages, where these guys are a bit slimmer, and I think they're like 400, let's see, 350, 75, 400-ish. It's a longer story on its own, but it's a standalone, whereas the Hunger Games story was 3 books. So I suppose this one needed a little more heft to be able to tell the story. Coriolanus Snow, which is what this is. Quick background. If you are one of the 4 people that did not watch the Hunger Games or read the books, this is a story based on the president that appears in the Hunger Games. This is going back in time to the war, partially the end of the war, partially some flashbacks to things during the war. But this book introduces you to the time when there was an uprising between the districts and the capital that were the introduction of the Hunger Games. And the Hunger Games are written of in here. By the point that you get to here, the Hunger Games have been going on. It's a good question. Quarter quell. I think it's the 75th. So you get introduced to this story, I want to say, the 74th Hunger Games. Yes. Oh, damn, I'm good. Okay. First book that introduces you to all of these characters in the world in which they live takes place at the 74th Hunger Games. The Hunger Games are an arena-style fight to the death between 2 tributes from each of the districts that exist in this world.
And so it was decreed that each year the 12 districts of Panem shall offer up in tribute 1 young man and woman between the ages of 12 and 18 to be trained in the art of survival and to be prepared to fight to the death.
And there's 1 entry for each year. If you are poor, which this doesn't come out in the movies, or at least it's not clear in the movies, it's very well explained in the books. But if you are very poor, because everybody in the districts is poor, but if you are very, very poor, you can enter your name extra times to get extra rations of food, grains, things to eat. And because the heroine of these books, Katniss Everdeen, is very, very poor, her mother's mentally unwell, her father is dead, she has put her name in a lot of times. Even if she has so many times her name in this bowl, she doesn't actually get called. Her little sister, who is for the first year in this bowl, is who gets called, and she volunteers for her. And that's where you start to have this story go on. The boy who gets called for her district, turns out he was secretly in love with her their whole lives. And she also has a boy back home that is just a friend of hers who she's hunted with for years to keep her family alive. They both were orphaned at a young age, and they've been the person who sustained their family and kept everybody with food and game. They fished together, they hunted together. So there's the introduction of kind of the love triangle. During this entire thing, there's the horror of these kids getting sent to the capital, who's in charge, that's the district that's in charge, brings them up there and has them fight each other for their entertainment to the death. The reason why this exists in the first place is because the districts had uprisen against the capital at some point, because the capital is fancy and rich and has all of these things, and the people in the districts are beaten down and they live under a military state all the time and they have nothing and they're basically dying. So at some point they uprise against the capital. The capital, it's the actual war itself spans multiple years, and the capital almost gets beaten because the capital relies on the districts for everything. There's a district that does coal, there's a district that does the farming, there's a district that does the fishing. So they basically close them off and try to starve them out, but the capital ultimately does win. And as a consequence, the treaty is written where these Hunger Games will happen once a year. The capital will punish the districts a bit with keeping them even more starved, but also they will kill 23 of their children every year. There's one victor. That victor goes on to have immunity for the rest of their lives, but then they have to be a mentor for all of the next victors that come along. The country of Panem is run by a gentleman by the name of President Snow, and he's kind of like a Wizard of Oz figure in the beginning. You don't really get to know him very much. Again, this is talking about the books, because if you watch the movies, there's like clips to Snow and him kind of like being a puppet master in the background. They use him to say a lot of things that were not dialogue in the books. That's a commentary about power and why you have to subdue people to maintain control. So they use him as a kind of figure in the movie in a different way than he exists in the books. In the books, there's just kind of, about President Snow. There's rumors about him that he is crooked and has disposed of his enemies with poison. That's why he keeps a rose next to him and his lips are so red, because he's kind of rotting from the inside from the small amounts of poison that he's ingested to try to prove that he's not poisoning somebody while he poisons them. So he's like this ghoulish figure that is in charge of all this stuff, but he doesn't have a direct connection with Katniss. He doesn't know who she is or have any sort of real vendetta against her. She is seen as somebody that's noted because she volunteers for her little sister, but it's not like in the movies where they're like, oh no, she's going to be a troublemaker. This does not exist in the books. So you don't really get to know Snow until all of the games play out and Katniss ends up winning with her original tribute from 12, because they have created this whole love story on screen. People fall in love with them. The game makers who designed this whole insanity devise kind of like a show-stopping thing where they say, oh, if you're from the same district at a certain point in the games, 2 of you can survive. So that pushes them together. They help each other. Everybody in the capital falls in love with them, because by this point, the games are televised and people bet on who's going to win. They send supplies and needed medicines and things into the arena for the person that they love. It's super interactive, and it almost seems like a large part of the capital's life is devoted to watching or participating in some way in these games. There are stylists who do up the contestants. There are makeup artists and beauty people whose entire career is taking care of contestants of the games when the time rolls around, because they have them looking beautiful and glamorous. They make costumes for them, like it's a whole pageantry that, again, everybody interacts with. The districts are forced to watch the games, but the capital wants to watch the games, and then they fall in love with the characters and they fall in love with whoever wins, and they have their favorites over the years. It's like a reality television gladiator show, right? Which just highlights their depravity and the soulless city rich people who don't care about the lives of these poor children, because they have disassociated from them and they don't see them as actual people. They see them as subhuman, which this entire world is based, as Suzanne Collins, who's the author, has said, on an idea of America. So there are definitely groups of people that get dehumanized in this country, and that people don't see their pain and their struggle as being valid or as seeing it as realistic as their own, because they haven't experienced it themselves. That isn't just in America, that is everywhere. There are a lot of people who have issues with empathy if they haven't actually lived that life, and societally that builds a certain structure, but we'll get more into that later. So Snow does not really figure into the actual story until at the very end to create even more of a hype moment, because they told him that 2 people from the same district can survive. At the very end, when they've overcome all of these crazy things, they've overcome attacks by the other kids who are trying to kill them, because that's the only way to survive the arena. They've survived being hurt. They've survived traps and traumas and all of the things inside of this space. And they finally made it together to the very end. It's just them 2. And the announcer comes on and is like, oh, by the way, change the rules. Actually, only one of you can survive. Go! So they're supposed to kill each other. And in that moment, Katniss in the book scrambles and is like, oh my God, okay, I think I have a plan. It might be able to work. But Peeta is actually so in love with her, and he's a character who's just like, kill me. It has to be you, right? But at some point earlier in the story, Peeta had picked up some poisoned berries, not knowing that they were poisonous. Katniss immediately knew it, threw them out of his hand, and it's just one of the many times that it shows that he was, even though he was in the district, he grew up in a bakery, and he was much better taken care of than she was. He doesn't have as many survival skills as she does. I guess she keeps these berries somewhere, and in the end, she's like, here, take them, so that they can have a double suicide. The Capitol is not going to win. We're both going to die. And she tells him to trust her. He says, okay. And they're about to commit their suicide, which I think he actually probably would have committed the suicide. When the game makers obviously know that this cannot happen, you can't not have a victor, and they stop and they're like, no, stop, okay, you both won. The Hunger Games, the winners are Katniss Everdeen and Peeta Mellark. There we go, Peeta Mellark. So they win. There's a million other things that happen during that story. She actually ends up having feelings for him, but she doesn't know how real they are because they're in this like life-threatening situation. A lot of the book happens inside of her brain with her thoughts. She's not a hugely verbal person. We really get to know kind of the world through her eyes. It's just written in first person. Basically, what they do when they threaten to take the berries is that they subvert the Capitol's will, and this now creates a relationship with Snow. And the idea, the subtext is like, you know, you're going to have to pay for this. And this is where kind of her relationship comes in with him. And he's this figure of authority that is going to create scenarios that is going to kill her some way or another, because the Capitol always has to be in control. And no rebel, because there are rebellions that happen in the different districts, even though very small ones, and there's just like a simmering. But if you give these districts too much hope, if you give them a figure, then that's the danger. You cannot give them a figure. And that's, you know, again, a commentary on the world in general, because you can have unrest that will peter out over and over again because there's no centralized command. There's no guiding force. So often through history, when you see revolutions that have happened, there is a person who grabs all of those people and gets all of those emotions together, and they harness that into a full-blown revolution. And a lot of times, if they lose that leadership, the revolutions aren't successful. Sometimes other people take it up and it's too far gone and it's okay. But particular symbols as created by individual people that we care about, that we invest in, that represent certain things to us, become so powerful, and it can change the world. One person and how much the group that they're related to loves them can change the world. So Snow understands the power of this, and that leads him to this vendetta with her, this obsession and vendetta with her. He can't outright kill her, but he has to get rid of her. And so, or he has to either get rid of her, or he has to bring her so much into the Capitol fold that then he can utilize her as a way to keep everybody calm that way. And they make an attempt at that because she just wanted to survive. She has no intention of being a revolutionary leader. She's just a girl that wanted to get the hell out of there and did what she had to do so.
I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to be in the games. I just wanted to save my sister and keep Peeta alive.
Miss Everdeen, it's the things we love most that destroy us.
becoming a symbol, whether she realized it or not. So Snow's at that point, you're getting into book number 2, and he's like, now you gotta tap dance, baby. You guys were gonna kill yourselves not to subvert the Capitol. You were gonna do it because you were so in love. You were crazy in love. Turns out you're so crazy in love that you're gonna get married. And she's not sure if she wants to spend her rest of her life with this guy, but it's either you get married or I start hurting your family. So, because at that point, Snow comes and pays her a visit, and they have to do a promotional tour all over the districts, and they have to smile and wave in their pretty clothes and show how in love they are. And he tells her basically, like, you have to convince me that it's real, that this was all some silly young girl who loved her man. And at the end of the tour, when she sees him again, he just pops up scarily in her new house in her district that she gets from having been a victor. He pops up and she's like, did I convince you? And he was like, no, ma'am. And then they announce the 75th Hunger Games, which is the Quarter Quell. And the Quarter Quell always has a very special, out there theme, because what's better than robotic animals and tsunamis and forests that are trying to kill these children? How can you do this a better way, right? One year it was about the setting that they plunked them into. Another year, I think they like tripled the amount of contestants that could go in there. There were like a crap ton of these kids that had to kill each other. Every Quarter Quell, this is 75, was special. So 25 and 50 were the special ones. And her mentor, I believe, won the 50th one. Anyways, so their special one that exists in this magic box, that these Quarter Quell ideas were written out at the beginning of the Hunger Games. This is nothing that is brand new, which is correct. This one happens to be contestants for the Quarter Quell have to be chosen from the victors of the districts, which everybody is up in arms about, because the idea of having murdered 23 other kids when you were a kid was that you would never have to fight again and your family would be safe. Well, if you had kids in your family, they wouldn't be safe, but you would never have to fight again. You would live in this nice house in your district. You would get all of this money. You made your sacrifice. But the only way to punish both of them is to do it this way, because the victors in their district are Katniss, Peeta, and her mentor, Haymitch. And when Haymitch gets called, it has to be one girl and one boy. When Haymitch gets called, Peeta volunteers for him. Or does Haymitch never get called? I can't remember. Either way, they both end up back in it like they knew that they were going to. And in other districts, like, some of the people are old. They're so old. Like, there's no way they're surviving this arena. Some of them are drug addicts because they have to live for the rest of their lives with the fact that they have killed all of those kids. Some of them are all messed up because they became superstars and the Capitol used them in whatever nefarious ways. They used them to sleep with powerful people that they wanted to control. They used them as political pawns. So it's just a group of people that's all messed up. But they're all killers. Like, they all survived. So this is a serious thing that she's going into. Again, out of that, there's a plot to bust her out of there, her and Peeta out of there, escape. A bunch of people die. I think there's 6 or 7 of them that actually make it out of there in the escape plan, which the head of the games actually ends up being in on the escape plan. And they get them all to District 13, which is this hidden district that's been in lore forever, that possibly existed, even though the Capitol has said it was the nuclear district and it was blown to smithereens during the last rebellion. They get to District 13, it's underground, it does actually exist, and the Capitol knows that it's there. They just agreed to pretend like it's not there, and 13 agrees to stay underground and hidden away because they do have nuclear weapons, and it would, if they actually went into open combat, it would result in the end of the war. So they're basically aiming their missiles at each other. I'm going to leave you alone. I'm going to leave you alone. You just stay quiet, 13. They bust her out because she has now become this symbol of the revolution, whether she wanted to or not. 13 has been gearing up all these years, even though they said they're just going to stay quiet. They have been gearing up to bust out and fight the Capitol. They've got weapons. They've got a district that's ready to fight. And it turns into all-out warfare with Snow. And then the relationship with Snow becomes more and more specific as she's making videos that's like, I'm coming for you, you son of a... As he starts doing things to harm her, it becomes much more personal. At the end of the books, though, her relationship with Snow actually ends up exposing the problem with all power. Power corrupts absolutely, and whatever the case is. Or you can always think that you're the hero, but you can turn into the bad guy. There are things that happen where her boy love from her district originally ends up being willing to do whatever to win against the Capitol. That includes hurting whoever, and she's against that. Also, the president of 13, or the leader of 13, who's Coin, he makes her question, like, you think she's not using you right now for what she wants? She wants to be in power. It's this whole, like, mind flip at the end. His last conversation with her, where he's clearly dying. Like, the rebels have won, the districts have won, Katniss is in the Capitol, Snow's locked up, he's gonna be executed any day, but he's clearly dying from the actual poisoning that he's been dying from. And they have one final conversation that is very revelatory. This is Oz exposed. So by the end of the story, the sister that she had volunteered to go into the arena to save gets killed. She's a medic for the revolution. There are a bunch of little kids that are being held hostage in front of the Capitol. That is believed that Snow is holding these kids hostage. Bombs get set off that harm all of these kids. In response, the rebels have made it all the way to the Capitol gates, basically. In response, the rebel medics go to help these kids, and her little sister is there when the second set of bombs, purposely made to harm the medical personnel, goes off, and her sister dies. And she thinks this is Snow, and this, like, is a whole other impetus. They break into the place. Like, this is the last push that they needed to end all of this. They capture him. That's when it's over. Everything's done, right? So she's a bit crazy. She tries to save her sister. When one of the bombs goes off, she ends up on fire. They have to graft her skin a bunch of times. Time has passed between the time that they've won and when she ends up having this conversation with Snow shortly before they're going to execute him. And again, he's dying. So she goes in there kind of like in a haze, like she just has to see this bastard. She actually isn't going looking for him. She smells the roses that he's known for, and she says she needs to go in there for one single bloom to place in Snow's lapel before she shoots him. And then she realizes he's in there and she needs to see him. And he says, there are so many things we should discuss, but I have a feeling your visit will be brief. So first things first. I wanted to tell you how very sorry I am about your sister. Low blow. She's a bit drugged still. He continues, so wasteful, so unnecessary. Anyone could see the game was over by that point. In fact, I was just about to issue an official surrender when they released those parachutes, which were the parachutes holding the bombs. In her mind, she's like, this doesn't make sense. You released the parachutes. He goes on. She clearly looks confused when he says this. Well, you really didn't think I gave the order, did you? Forget the obvious fact that if I'd had a working hovercraft at my disposal, I'd have been using it to make an escape. But that aside, what purpose could it have served? We both know I'm not above killing children, but I'm not wasteful. I take life for very specific reasons. And there was no reason for me to destroy a pen full of Capitol children. None at all. So there were Capitol children that were there, and the rebels go to save them. She's thinking he has to be lying, but there's something like niggling there, right? He goes, however, I must concede it was a masterful move on Coin's part. The idea that I was bombing our own helpless children instantly snapped whatever frail allegiance my people still felt to me. There was no real resistance after that. Did you know it aired live? You can see the Hunger Games, not creator, the game maker, the guy who leads the Hunger Games. You can see his hand in it, in the parachutes, in how dramatic it was. He goes, I'm sure he wasn't gunning for your sister, but these things happen. And then she's taken back into a flashback where she's not standing there with Snow. She's remembering her boyhood friend sitting talking to the ammunition people about this idea of creating a small disturbance or a small trap that will lure people there for the big trap. And so there's so many things are coming to light where she's realizing that the things that they've done to win are just as heinous as what this man has done to stay in power. My failure, he said, was being so slow to grasp Coin's plan, to let the Capitol and districts destroy one another and then step in to take power with 13 barely scratched. Make no mistake, she was intending to take my place right from the beginning. And he's just like so smooth of a bad guy. She writes him so well. Katniss is like, I don't believe you. And he goes, oh my dear Miss Everdeen, I thought we had agreed not to lie to each other. Close scene. In the very final parts of that, she decides she was actually always promised the ability to be the one to kill Snow. And so in his final moments, when they parade him out in front of all of the people, she's supposed to let loose her arrow and kill him right there. And out is this coin who is going to be the new leader, who's also shown to be corrupt, as she believes at this point. Snow starts coughing. He's like coughing up blood. He's clearly dying. As they're like converging to try to do something about that, she pulls the arrow and murders Coin instead. Snow dies anyway. Pandemonium. She ends up being released though, and somebody else takes over, and she goes off to her district and lives as happily as she can with all of this trauma with Peeta, who she chooses to be with in the end. They cut to their kids, with them being in a field with little kids and knowing that they'll never have to be in Hunger Games. So then Suzanne decided that you should hear the story of Snow. She released this one, I think it was 2020. Yes, 2020. This book was so ridiculously good. It is so ridiculously good. We go back in time to the 10th Hunger Games. Coriolanus is a child. He did not, it's back to kids being with kids. He did not invent the Hunger Games. He was just the president of Panem by the time we meet him at the 74th one. Which, if you do the math, at the 74th one, he's like old as crap anyway. He was about to die. So here we meet him when he's about to graduate from secondary school, which is equivalent to high school. It's the 10th annual Hunger Games. They are 10 years out of the last rebellion, and the horrors that the Capitol has seen during that war of rebellion have changed them forever. There are people starving in the streets. There are kids who lost both of their parents, or one parent. He loses both of his parents and ends up with his cousin Tigris, who, if you read the books, and actually she appears in the movie as well, she ends up being the tiger-like lady who used to be a very famous stylist in the games for years. She ends up being the tiger-like lady who helps save Katniss. Interesting. But his cousin Tigris has lost both of her parents. It's them two now living with their grandmother in this dilapidated mansion that has fallen apart because of the war, because they haven't had money. They haven't had anyone to support them. All of their money was tied up in munitions, but it was in District 13, who was leading this rebellion. And supposedly all their stuff got blown to smithereens, which you find out later isn't true. The Snows lose all of their money. In those years, everybody's starving. There are scenes where they're out looking for food. The two cousins are little and they're out looking for food when she's, I think, 10 and he's 8-ish, around there. They see the neighbors. It's during the winter. They see the neighbors like cutting off the leg of somebody who's dead, who was also their neighbor, because they're going to go eat it. So they've been horrified and traumatized by what they have lived through that they did not choose. They are children, right? They didn't choose to be in the Capitol. They didn't choose for these people to do the harm, the Capitol people to do the harm that they did to the districts that causes this rebellion, but they suffer nonetheless. He grows up in this world where the districts are doing heinous things to them to try to win, and they're starving out all these families. Sprinkled with that is the ideology that they have grown up with from their parents, from their grandparents, about them being superior. Because they're rich, they're the haves, and everybody else is the have-nots. So again, the dehumanizing factor. A lot of times when he's saying something or thinking something that is derogatory, she adds, like, you know, as grandmother would say, or as my father used to tell me. It's kind of this language around hate being taught. You're not born feeling that way. So we meet him when he has survived all of this, but he and the city and his family are still trying to recover. There are other people that are recovering much faster because they have adults who have been able to find work and start rebuilding some things, but they're still struggling. And into this 10th Hunger Games, his school, which is tied very closely to the Hunger Games, decides that they're going to have 24 of the brightest students mentor these new Hunger Games participants. So this is the beginning of the mentor program. It ends up changing later, obviously, of who is the mentor, but it starts with capital children.
I have summoned you all here for the 10th annual reaping ceremony, in which we choose 2 children from each district to fight to the death in the Hunger Games.
From District 12, Lucy Gray Bear.
It's them kind of getting into a group and figuring out ideas how to make it more exciting, because the first 9 Hunger Games have basically been grabbing these 24 kids from the districts, throwing them in an old arena that housed events. So, you know, think about like a concert arena. They throw them in an old arena that's falling apart, hand them a bunch of weapons, and are like, kill each other. And then they tape it. It's horrifying, it's boring, and the Capitol residents have just come out of a war where they have seen horrendous things. They're not interested in watching this. Nobody is watching the Hunger Games at this point. There's a crazy doctor who used to be a doctor of obstetrics, which is also horrifying, that is in charge of producing new ideas to make these games more exciting. Her name is Dr. Gall. In the movies, she's played by Viola Davis, which is phenomenal as a choice.
How tantalizing to see all your shining young faces on this auspicious day. I am Dr. Volumnia Gall, your humble head game maker in charge of the War Department and all its affiliated concerns. I've broken free of my laboratory today to examine you, the leaders of the next generation. I won't be around forever after all.
However, I'm going to tell you right now, I didn't like the movie. Now, we've talked about this before, guys. We've talked about how I really usually don't like the movie. So this is not surprising, and it's okay. It's okay that I don't like the movie. I didn't expect to like the movie. I will say though, there's certain things that I know that you cannot translate into a movie, and I expect to not like it. If there is a story that has a large developed portion of it that lives inside the hero's mind or your protagonist's mind, it's a lot of thought going on versus dialogue. That is going to be very difficult to translate into a movie, because you've got to make all these thoughts become scenes, and you have to condense them and make them coherent to give the same message that you gave in the book in words to the person viewing. It's very hard to do. Also, when a book is longer, it's harder to condense that down in the movie, so there's going to be things that are taken out. There are going to be things said or ideas conveyed, other characters than those which originally conveyed them in the book, because maybe those characters have not become so integral to the story, and you can get that message across through somebody else. So, for instance, Dr. Gall says things that are said by different people in the book. Dr. Gall in the movie, Viola Davis, and she's an amazing actress, and she plays such like a quirky, spooky version of this crazy lady. She does such a good job of it. But there are things that she said, like while I was watching, that I was like, she didn't say that. So-and-so said that, right? That's the expectation that I have watching a movie, that things like that are going to happen. Also, the other thing, a lot of times, I feel like the movie version tries to find people who look the most like we believe the characters looked. I feel like put that before other considerations a lot of times. And the thing with that is there might have been somebody out there who would have been a better character for that person, doesn't look anything like that person. Because, okay, for instance, with these books, right, there's a lot of young people playing the parts. And to find, like, the kids in here are so well written. The kids in all of her books are so well written. To find a young actor who has enough depth of character and enough talent to be able to play some of these roles so beautifully, like that are written, is hard. I get that. But there are amazing young actors all of the time. I don't think that that's the issue. I think it is that you find a young actor that looks like your person first, and then the likelihood of pulling an amazing performance out of somebody that young is lower than if you find somebody who looks like your character who's older, just by virtue of the fact that they haven't done it as long and they don't have as much experience, and you got to hone your craft. So for instance, in the Hunger Games movies, Peeta in the movies, I don't even know why she liked him, because blech. Peeta in the books, so well written, like the way their relationship develops, you cannot help but love him eventually, and then you hate him, and then you feel bad for him. Like, it's so complicated because, again, this is not a book about those books. This is not a video about those books, but it's all complicated because he's the good guy, and then the Capitol, they aren't able to rescue him, and the Capitol takes him, and they mess with his mind, and he becomes a crazy guy who wants to attack Katniss. It's whole wild. So the guy in the movies, but in the story, wonderful. So that's what I expect, right? I expect for you to look for somebody who looks like the guy. The good thing about Snow is you don't really have like a really specific idea of what he's supposed to look like, because he's an old ass man when you meet him in the Hunger Games. So you can really do whatever you want with who he shows up as here. I mean, she creates a guy who's like blonde, but it's not so specific that you have to have X person. I think that the actor actually did a pretty good job. He seemed to be a good actor. It's just that the tone of the movie, the messaging, I feel like, of the movie and what this book was, not even close. First of all, the movie was fine as like a thing to watch. It was not spectacular. Like, the story was not spectacular. But also, I think what's so amazing about this book, it's like, oh, it's the story of Snow. Like, it's the story of the bad guy. Do you really want to read that? But the way that she has you wondering if you like this guy so many times, like, pulls you in, pushes you back. You're like, it's so well done. In the movie, you do not like any of the Capitol people ever, but he's written, like, he comes off in the movie as he's just like genuinely good, but he's not. And then it's like he's genuinely good, and then he becomes bad. And it's like it's a weird thing, but the way that she does that in the book with everything being like sprinkled differently is because of his thoughts about things. So let's actually talk about the book. Like I said, you meet him 10 years after the last rebellion. He's about to graduate high school. He's trying to make himself distinguished in this task that they've set them so that he can get some kind of financing for his university education, because again, his family doesn't have anything. He is not a bad guy when we meet him. He loves his cousin so much. They're so close because they survived what they did together. And she helps him in innumerable ways of trying to make clothes for him that looks halfway decent when he has to go to things so that they don't know how poor and about to lose everything they are. And she feels bad for him and supports him in so many things. She's so tenderhearted about what's happening to everybody in the story. You really like Tigris. And you hold on to that, even though you know that she ends up participating in this world, because that's how she ended up being a stylist. But you know, she redeems herself at the very end. So he's trying to make it out. He's trying to make it out the hood, y'all. He's trying to save his family, and he's trying to figure out a way to help support them. That's how you meet him. As he goes through it, there are thoughts and feelings that he has that you're like, when he refers to the districts that rebelled against them, he's like the district rabble, you know, he's very derogatory about them, but he hates them as most of his classmates hate them. Not so much because they feel like they're these fancy Capitol people that should be above them, because the streets still have rubble on them. The buildings are still recuperating. They don't do that in the movie. They make it everywhere seem fancy except for Snow's house. But everybody is still like shell-shocked and trying to recover from everything that has happened. And all these young people don't have memories of all the bad things that their group did to the districts. They just have memories of what was done to them. And so they don't put it in context of like, those people had to do that to us because we were hurting them. They put it in context of, look what these people did to us. And that's a theme that comes up over and over again I feel like there's commentary on how quickly we forget. There's commentary on, again, who's the bad guy at any given time. And are those feelings valid or are they not? Because there are other characters like Suzanne, who is a classmate of Coriolanus's, who's been there since the end of the war because his father came from, I believe it was 1 or 2, and he was a war profiteer. He had ammunition. He ended up helping the capital, and now they've let them live there. So he used to be in the districts with these people, and he has so much empathy. And his mom also is very like hometownish. She wishes she could have stayed there. They only left so that he would never be reaped into the Hunger Games, even though his father is very ambitious, and it's more his father that wanted them to move. He is totally empathetic for the districts. He hates the fact that he has to be a part of this Hunger Games project, and he ends up having to mentor a kid from his district, somebody that he knew, that he was in class with. So there are people who feel bad, but then it's like, is it only possible for him to feel bad because he was one of them? Is that another commentary? Is the only way for you to have real empathy to have actually walked in somebody else's shoes? I do not know. There are other students in the class who have varying degrees of feeling bad about what they're being asked to do, especially when the Hunger Games kids come in to the Capitol and they start interacting with them and they see the condition that they kept them in. When we get to Hunger Games over here, they're putting them in fancy apartments and giving them wardrobes and doing all this fancy stuff to them. Over here, they're wearing the same rags that they had on in their district when they were taken, and they dump them from some cart into the monkey pen at the zoo. They don't give them food, they don't give them water, they just leave them there. And that starts you meeting Coriolanus, who is upset that he gets the girl Victor from 12 because they're usually seen as being weak. Ironically 12, that's where Katniss is from. But he gets her, he's upset, but he decides he's going to do the best that he can with what he's got, and he starts putting on a performance for the cameras and trying to show that he can make this a better show through his interactions with this girl. And the whole time you go back and forth with, when he does interact with them, he actually feels bad. His thoughts are like, Jesus Christ, look at the condition they have them in. But then he's like, oh wait, there's a camera. Hey, come sing. It'll give you better chances. So you're like, what does he actually feel? Is he just this way because of where he is? When you first meet him, he's so contradictory in ways of like, he's actually so performative that I don't think he knows even who he is at this point. He says somebody compliments him on his shirt, even though it's all messed up, like it's a cheap shirt that they tried to make look nice. And then he goes back to the person who compliments him, lovely gown, it's new, isn't it? And in his mind, he goes, he could tell at a glance that it was the same dress she always wore to the reaping ceremony, refurbished with tufts of black feathers. But she had validated his shirt, and he needed to return the favor. And that's who you see of him over and over again. He is putting on the performance of his life to try and save his family and get back to this pinnacle of life that they had before, not thinking whether or not that lifestyle is valid or they deserved it or any of that. They've just been in this hell for so long, and that's where he thinks that they belong. So they go through the whole Hunger Games, they throw them in the pen, all these things happen. Through this, he develops more and more of a relationship with Suzanne. Even though he's had a relationship with him, he's been in class with him for 10 years since he came to their school from the districts. So Janice keeps doing wild stuff in rebellion against this life that his father's trying to force him to live. At one point, he breaks into the arena, putting himself in danger, worrying his mother. They forced Coriolanus to go in there after him, Dr. Gall does, because she's crazy, because she thinks that he might be the only one that can talk Janice out of there. And obviously the kid's in a bunch of trouble because he should not be in this damn arena anyway. It's going against the government. So he goes in there and puts his life at risk to save him. And he's going back and forth mad at him for having forced him into this position, for like caring so much about these damn people and trying to make this point. You're not making any point. They're not going to air this. You're not doing this to help anybody. You're being performative for the sake of being performative because you can't live with the guilt of you not having been as bad off as them. And again, another commentary there, right? In him helping him get out of there, they get attacked by the district kids. They tried to kill them. Instead of ignoring them. One of them comes at Coriolanus with a knife and he falls down. He ends up grabbing the only thing that he could find, which is a 2x4, and he hits, it's dark, he can't see anything. He hits as much things as he can. He doesn't even know what parts of his body he's hitting, and he gets out of there. They end up escaping. Then he's in the medical unit being tended by Dr. Gall. And she goes, what was it like in the arena? And he says, terrifying. She says, it's meant to be. What about the tributes? He's like, what about them? He's on a gurney. She's stitching him up. He's terrified. He spends a lot of this book being terrified. He lives in a lot of fear of the unknown, fear of his family ending up on the streets, fear of something physical happening to him, fear of people not liking him, fear of not getting back to who he used to be. She says, what about the tributes? He says, what about them? Dr. Gall goes, what did you think of them now that their chains have been removed? Now that they've tried to kill you? Because it was of no benefit to them, your death. You're not the competition. He goes in his mind, it's true, they were close enough to recognize him, but they'd hunted him down, even though they could have used that opportunity to kill each other, to try to win. He goes, I think I underestimated how much they hate us. And she responds, and when you realize that, what was your response? And he responds back to her, I wanted them dead. I wanted every one of them dead. And she goes, well, mission accomplished with that little one from 8. You beat him to a pulp. So he finds out that he murdered the boy. And then she says, but it was such a wonderful opportunity for you, very transformative. And he goes, was it? Like, he remembers the sickening thud of the board against this little boy while he killed him. He's not happy about having killed him. So he murdered the boy? No, he's arguing with himself. It was self-defense. Like, that's not fair. He didn't kill him. There would never be erasing this idea that he killed this boy. He's never going to get his innocence back. This is what he's thinking to himself. He had taken human life. She goes, wasn't it? More than I could have hoped. I needed you to get Sejanus out of the arena, but I wanted you to taste that as well. He goes, even if it killed me? She said, without the threat of death, it wouldn't have been much of a lesson. What happened in the arena? That's humanity undressed, the tributes, and you too. How quickly civilization disappears. All your fine manners, education, family background, everything you pride yourself on, stripped away in the blink of an eye, revealing everything you actually are. A boy with a club who beats another boy to death. That's mankind in its natural state. And he goes, are we really as bad as all that? She said, I would say yes, absolutely. But it's a matter of personal opinion. What do you think? He says, I think I wouldn't have beaten anyone to death if you hadn't stuck me in that arena. She goes, you could blame it on the circumstances, the environment, but you made the choices you made, no one else. It's a lot to take in all at once, but it's essential that you make an effort to answer that question. What are human beings? Who are human beings? Because who we are determines the type of governing we need. Definitely should never start to say it again. Never. So you see clearly that he doesn't want to be this monster. So you have to ask yourself at a certain point, is she trying to write him as the hero, or is she trying to write him as the villain? Who's the hero? Who's the hero? Who's the actual hero of the story, right? Is it Sejanus, who feels so bad for everybody that he keeps endangering himself and the people around him to try to save them? Is it Coriolanus, where he's thrown into this life that he cannot control and just becomes a victim of circumstance? Or is it the girl from 12 that Coriolanus ends up falling in love with, named Lucy Gray, who is kind of the mouthpiece for the rebuttal to all of that? The rebuttal to are you just stuck in this world that's out of your control? She says at one point they had an argument around whose fault the damage was during the last war, because he had suffered as well. She had suffered. They basically say, like, you know, I'm sorry if you were upset. Obviously, all those things that happened weren't our fault. He says, I'm sorry, I overreacted, but I have to be honest with you. I don't agree with everything the Capitol does, but I am Capitol, and on the whole, I think we're right about needing order. And she says, basically, like, do you think what they're doing is right? And he responds, I don't even know why we do half the things we do, to be honest. She says, do you think the Hunger Games are right? He's like, I don't even know why we do them, to be honest. But I do think the people are forgetting the war way too fast. What we did to each other, what we're capable of, districts and Capitol both. I know the Capitol must seem hardline out here, but we're just trying to keep things under control. Otherwise, there'd be chaos and people running around killing each other, like in the arena. And she's taken aback and she goes, that's what you think people would do? And he goes, I do. Unless there's law and someone enforcing it, I think we might as well be animals. Like it or not, the Capitol is the only thing keeping us safe. Again, back to fear. He just has so much fear. She goes, so they keep me safe. Again, this is the girl who just came out of the arena. And what do I give up for that? And he's like, give up? Why nothing? He's thinking about himself, the privileged people who give up nothing, right? Or he doesn't give up anything that he cares about. She says her group of singers did. They can't travel. They can't perform without a say-so. They can only sing certain types of songs. They have to fight getting round up, and you get shot dead if you do fight. You try to keep your family together, and you get your head broken, like my mama, is what she says. What if I think that price is too high to pay? Maybe my freedom's worth the risk. You start to see him develop as a person who clings to these ideas more out of fear than anything else. He falls in love with her. He helps her win the Hunger Games, and he gets found out and punished for it. They send him to be a peacekeeper. His family loses the little chance that they had to regain anything, and he gets sent to be a peacekeeper in 12 with Sejanus, who also ends up being in trouble for the stunt that he pulled. So they get sent to 12 as peacekeepers. He sees her there, and they develop a relationship. But the whole time, Sejanus is getting involved with rebels in the district. He keeps endangering himself and Coriolanus. And Coriolanus keeps trying to save him, and he just gets so sick of it. Like, he gets to a point where he doesn't care why Lucy Gray and Sejanus feel like these people need to be free. Like, the things that you're willing to do for freedom are so risky and they're so dangerous that you are a danger at this point. You're a danger to me, you're a danger to society, and you should be stopped. He keeps trying to stop them, and it culminates in a crime, and he ends up implicating Sejanus because at that point he just feels like there is no way to save this guy. He's just going to keep doing this. And Sejanus ends up getting hanged because of it, and he's horrified by what he did. But he keeps saying to himself, like, he doesn't know how he could have had any other option. Throughout all this, there's a bunch of other politics and a bunch of other things going on with Lucy Gray and her group of singers and this guy who used to like her. There's a whole other story there. And his fear keeps coming back with jealousy. And does she really care about me? Or is she just using me? That culminates in some final scenes where he does something so heinous and shoots at her when they're escaping, because he doesn't know if she's trying to kill him. Like, he's so in his mind about what these people are willing to do, right? They're willing to commit heinous crimes for freedom's sake. Like, what would they do to me? And enter back in the fear. He ends up somehow getting seen as, like, you know, the guy who narked on Sejanus. He goes back to the Capitol. They congratulate him. He's on his road back where he belongs. Sejanus's parents don't know the part that he played, so they end up helping him. These rich people end up helping take care of him, and that also is another side of who he becomes, of using people by deceit to get where he wants to go. By the end of the story, he is firmly President Snow, or on his road to being President Snow. But everywhere along the way, you are asking yourself, what if it had happened differently? What if he had chosen something else? Because a real villain seems to be power, ego, fear. There's so many times where if he has to choose between freedom or the comfort of the Capitol, or if it's any type of gray, his fear shuts him down and he chooses the bad thing, or the more comfortable thing, or the more cowardly thing. It's only when it's black and white where you see that he chooses right and you start to have hope. But every time it gets gray, you're like, oh man, he's just too scared. And there are so many people like that in this world. Does that ultimately make him the bad guy? He becomes the bad guy. But morally, you can keep asking that question. Subscribe, hit like, come back. What did you think? Did you read the book? Did you think that she did a phenomenal job with making you question whether or not you like snow? Like, did you feel crazy like I did at one point and say, I might like snow? Did you watch the movie and get as angry as I did? I don't know. I would like to know. But either way, I really am so glad if you made it this far, and I really hope that you come back to the next one. And I really have to film it at an earlier time unless I like my tiger stripes. I'll be like Tigris. Again, did you subscribe? Did you like it? You should like it, because I would really appreciate it if you liked it. For this book, I'm going to give it 4.5 pandas. I I'm not giving it 5 because that has to be for like the absolute most phenomenal thing ever. But this is really as close as you're gonna get. It is so well written. It is such a good book. It made me think so much. And today, with what is happening in the world, it makes you think. When she wrote it in 2020, there was so much going on that made you think. And now in 23, going into 24, there's so much more that's making you think. And there's so many echoes of art imitating life. And that's what I love about books. There's just so much to be said for what it gives to you, what it does for society. So again, thank you so much for being here, book friends. I will see you next time, because you're gonna subscribe. I have to say that more. I have to put like a little sign above my camera that says subscribe, so that I say it every 5 minutes. But come back, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, book friends.